Marcus Henderson, or Mac to anyone who bothered to remember his name, was the kind of guy who organized his sock drawer by thread count and considered his Tuesday morning oatmeal routine a sacred ritual. At 43, he had achieved the perfect balance of mediocrity that suburban Ohio demanded. His greatest accomplishment was keeping his goldfish Gerald alive for 6 months, which was frankly more impressive than anything he'd done at Midwest Accounting Solutions. Mac had no idea that somewhere in the darkest corner of the galaxy, 12 of the universe's most feared assassins were studying his photo with the kind of intensity usually reserved for nuclear launch codes. Target Marcus Henderson, droned Commander Vex through his helmet's voice modulator, which made him sound like a robot gargling marbles. Classification, Class a Galactic Threat. Elimination Priority Maximum. The briefing room aboard the death ship Inevitable Demise buzzed with the kind of energy you'd expect from a cosmic murder convention. Kronk the Bone Crusher, a 7-foot pile of muscle and bad decisions, cracked his knuckles loud enough to shatter nearby asteroids. What's so dangerous about this tiny human? He looks like he couldn't hurt a space fly. Looks can be deceiving, replied Zara the Mind Ripper, adjusting her psychic amplifier crown. Though I have to admit, his thoughts are probably just tax forms and grocery lists. Whisper the Silent Death, whose reputation was built on never making a sound, accidentally knocked over a chair while trying to look menacing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The remaining 9 assassins represented the galaxy's finest collection of professional killers, each more ridiculous than the last. There was Blade the Butter Knife, who insisted his name was intimidating despite obvious evidence to the contrary. Nova the Exploder, whose hobby was turning planets into confetti. Fang the Dental Nightmare, whose species had evolved 47 different types of teeth specifically for murder. And Crunch the Serial Killer, who had genuinely misunderstood his job description but was too embarrassed to correct anyone. This Henderson character single-handedly exposed the Galactic Revenue Service's corruption scandal, Vex continued, pulling up holographic evidence. 17 star systems are now demanding tax refunds. The economy is collapsing. Wars are being fought over decimal points. And he did this how? Asked Spike the Impaler, polishing his collection of pointy objects. By doing his job, Vex replied with the kind of disdain usually reserved for people who put pineapple on pizza. The assassins exchanged glances that would have been meaningful if half of them hadn't been wearing masks, helmets, or had faces that defied conventional understanding of facial expressions. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Mac was having his own crisis. He'd run out of his favorite brand of instant coffee and was debating whether switching to decaf constituted a major life change. These were the kinds of decisions that kept him awake at night, along with wondering if Gerald the Goldfish judged him for eating cereal for dinner. Another day, another dollar, Mac muttered to himself, which was technically accurate since his salary worked out to roughly $1 per day after taxes, rent, and the astronomical cost of keeping a goldfish properly entertained. He had no idea that his mundane Tuesday morning routine was about to be interrupted by the most expensive hit squad in galactic history, or that his biggest concern would soon shift from whether his oatmeal was too lumpy to whether he'd survive the next hour. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor that bordered on the criminally insane. The first sign that Mac's Tuesday wasn't going according to plan came when his hedge started screaming. Not the usual screaming that happened when he tried to trim it with kitchen scissors, but actual, legitimate screaming with what sounded like alien curse words. What in the name of collapsing nebulae is this organic barrier? Came a muffled voice from inside the privet hedge. Mac paused with his coffee mug halfway to his lips and peered out his kitchen window. The hedge was definitely making noise, and unless his neighbors had started some very aggressive gardening practices, something was seriously wrong. Vex the Vaporizer had intended to materialize dramatically in Mac's living room, but his coordinates had been off by approximately 3 feet and 2 dimensions. Instead of appearing as a harbinger of doom, he was now thoroughly tangled in what he would later describe in his incident report as hostile Earth vegetation. Status report crackled through the communication devices worn by all 12 assassins. Vex is compromised, came the reply, followed by the sound of branches snapping and dignity being irreparably damaged. Kronk the Bone Crusher had taken a different approach, attempting to break down Mac's front door with his signature move. Overwhelming force applied without any consideration for physics or common sense. Unfortunately, Mac had recently installed a doggy door for the neighbor's cat, and Kronk had somehow managed to get his massive frame wedged in the small opening like a cosmic cork. Perhaps, gasped Kronk, his voice strained from his predicament, we should have researched human architecture. Or basic geometry, added Whisper the Silent Death, who had tripped over Mac's garden gnome and was now lying in the petunias, but having a philosophical crisis about whether making noise while falling counted as breaking his vow of silence. Mac watched this unfold with the kind of detached interest usually reserved for particularly confusing reality television. His first thought was that his neighbors were probably filming some kind of elaborate prank show. His second thought was that he should probably put on pants. Inside the house, the remaining 9 assassins were having their own problems. Nova the Exploder had gotten distracted by Mac's microwave and was trying to figure out how humans had miniaturized fusion technology. Fang the Dental Nightmare was stuck in the bathroom, having locked himself in while attempting to hide, and was now too embarrassed to ask for help. This is not going according to plan, announced Zara the Mind Ripper, who was sitting cross-legged on Mac's couch, attempting to read his thoughts through the walls. His mental patterns are completely incomprehensible. It's just numbers and something about a goldfish named Gerald. Gerald's a good fish, Mac said conversationally, having entered his own living room to find it occupied by several individuals who looked like they'd escaped from a very expensive costume party. The assassins froze. This wasn't in the manual. Said Blade the Butter Knife, whose intimidating presence was somewhat undermined by the fact that he was holding Mac's TV remote and clearly had no idea how it worked. Are you Marcus Henderson? That's me, Mac replied, setting down his coffee mug with the kind of careful precision that suggested he was either very calm or very confused. And you are? Your death, announced Crunch the serial killer dramatically, then immediately looked embarrassed. I mean, we're here to kill you. For professional reasons. Mac blinked. Oh, that's interesting. Can I ask why? This was not the response they'd been trained for. The Assassin's Guild handbook clearly stated that targets should either run screaming, beg for mercy, or attempt to fight back with whatever pathetic weapons their primitive civilizations had developed. Nobody had prepared them for polite curiosity. You're a class of galactic threat, explained Spike the Impaler, who was now sitting in Mac's favorite armchair, because standing had become awkward. Ha, Mac said, considering this information. Would anyone like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. The offer of coffee created what military strategists would later classify as a tactical pause. The 12 deadliest assassins in the galaxy found themselves in the unprecedented situation of being offered refreshments by their target, and nobody was quite sure what the proper etiquette was for this scenario. Is this some kind of human battle ritual? Whispered Nova the Exploder to Fang the Dental Nightmare, who had finally escaped from the bathroom and was now hiding behind Mac's bookshelf. I think he's trying to poison us, Fang whispered back, though his 47 different types of teeth were chattering nervously. Mac, meanwhile, was bustling around his kitchen with the kind of domestic efficiency that came from years of living alone and having very few exciting things to do. He'd managed to free Kronk from the doggy door using a combination of dish soap and positive encouragement, and had helped Vex extract himself from the hedge with a pair of garden shears and the promise of explaining human topiary maintenance. I've got regular decaf and something called Morning Blast that I'm pretty sure is just regular coffee with extra caffeine and false advertising, Mac called out, arranging mugs on a tray with the kind of care usually reserved for defusing bombs. Why are you being nice to us? Asked Zara the Mind Ripper, who was still trying to penetrate Mac's thoughts and finding nothing but tax codes and grocery lists. We literally just told you we're here to kill you. Mac paused, considering the question with the same thoughtful expression he used when calculating compound interest. Well, you all seem like you're having a really hard time. I mean, you're in a strange place, you're probably stressed about work, and honestly, you look like you could use a friend. This was approximately the point where several assassins began questioning their career choices. But we're here to murder you, Blade the Butter Knife pointed out, though he said it with the kind of uncertainty that suggested he was no longer entirely sure about the plan. Right, I get that, Mac nodded, distributing coffee mugs with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years managing office birthday parties. But maybe we could talk about it first? I've got donuts too. Glazed chocolate, and something called Bavarian cream that I'm not entirely sure is legal in this state. It was at this moment that the true scope of Mac's accidental galactic terrorism became clear. The flashback sequence, as narrated by Vex through a series of increasingly frustrated explanations, it revealed the chain of events that had led to Mac being classified as the most dangerous being in the universe. 6 months earlier, Mac had been doing what he did best, finding mathematical inconsistencies in financial documents. His mundane job at Midwest Accounting Solutions had assigned him to audit what they believed was a small interstellar shipping company. Mac, being Mac, had approached the task with his usual obsessive attention to detail. You see, Vex explained while accepting a donut that was definitely better than anything available on the Death Ship. What your primitive planet classified as Galactic Logistics Incorporated was actually a front for the Galactic Revenue Service's embezzlement operation. Mac had discovered that someone had been skimming 0.003% off every transaction across 17 star systems. To most accountants, this would have been a minor footnote. To Mac, it was the kind of mathematical irregularity that kept him awake at night. So I filed a report, Mac said, dunking his donut in his coffee with the casual air of someone who had no idea he'd just explained how he'd accidentally toppled a galactic government. Your report, Vex continued, resulted in the exposure of a corruption network that had been operating for 3,000 years. The Galactic Revenue Service collapsed overnight. Wars started. Economies crashed. Star systems are still arguing about who owes what to whom. Oh, Mac said, looking genuinely surprised. I just thought they'd fix their accounting software. Whisper the Silent Death, who had been quietly eating a chocolate donut, accidentally made a sound that might have been a sob. The existential weight of traveling across the galaxy to kill someone whose greatest crime was being really, really good at his job was starting to sink in. So you're telling me, Mac said slowly, that I'm in trouble for doing my job correctly? Essentially, yes, admitted Kronk the Bone Crusher, who was now on his third donut and discovering that carbohydrates were much more satisfying than bone crushing. Mac considered this information while refilling everyone's coffee cups. That seems like a systemic problem rather than a personal failing on my part. And that was when the assassins realized they might be working for the wrong side. What followed could only be described as the most polite interrogation in the history of intergalactic relations. Mac, having accepted that he was apparently a wanted man, responded to this crisis the same way he responded to everything else, with methodical curiosity and an inexplicable desire to help everyone involved solve their problems. So, let me get this straight, Mac said, settling into his armchair with a notepad that he'd labeled Galactic Assassination Logistics in his neat handwriting. You're all professional killers, but you're employed by the same organization that I accidentally exposed for massive fraud? When you put it like that, it does sound problematic, admitted Spike the Impaler, who is struggling with the moral implications of his career choice and also with lactose intolerance after accepting Mac's offer of milk with his coffee. I mean, have you considered the possibility that you're not the bad guys in this scenario? Mac continued, adjusting his glasses with the kind of earnest concern that had made him exactly 3 friends in 43 years of life. Zara the Mind Ripper was having her own crisis. Her psychic abilities, which had been fine-tuned to penetrate the thoughts of criminal masterminds and galactic warlords, were completely useless against Mac's brain. Reading his thoughts was like trying to hack into a computer that only ran spreadsheet software. This is impossible, she muttered, rubbing her temples. Your mind is just tax forms and grocery lists and something about whether goldfish can feel existential dread. Well, Gerald does stare at his reflection a lot, Mac said thoughtfully. I've been wondering if he's having an identity crisis. See? This is what I'm talking about. Zara threw her hands up in frustration. Normal people don't think about their pet's psychological well-being with this level of detail. Maybe normal people should think about it more, Mac suggested, which caused several assassins to exchange glances that would have been meaningful if they hadn't been wearing masks or possessed faces that defied conventional understanding of facial expressions. Crunch the serial killer, who had been quietly eating his way through Mac's entire supply of breakfast foods, suddenly looked up from his fourth bowl of cornflakes. "Can I ask you something? Do you enjoy your job?" "My job?" Mac considered this question with the same careful attention he gave to everything else. "Well, I wouldn't say I enjoy it exactly. But I'm good at it, and it needs doing. And there's something satisfying about making numbers make sense." "But don't you want to do something more exciting?" Pressed Nova the Exploder, who was beginning to realize that her own career in planetary destruction might not be as fulfilling as she'd originally thought. "I used to think about that," Mac admitted, refilling the coffee pot for the third time. "But then I realized that somebody has to do the boring stuff. Somebody has to make sure the numbers add up and the paperwork gets filed and the systems work the way they're supposed to. If everyone was off having adventures, who would make sure the lights stayed on?" This observation hit the assembled assassins like a philosophical freight train. Here was someone who had found meaning in meaninglessness, who had discovered purpose in the mundane, who had achieved the kind of contentment that they'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Besides, Mac continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was conducting an impromptu therapy session for 12 of the galaxy's most dangerous individuals. "Adventure is overrated. I tried skydiving once. Spent the whole time worrying about the statistical probability of parachute failure and whether I'd remembered to water my plants." "But aren't you bored?" asked Blade the Butter Knife, who was starting to wonder if his intimidating name was actually holding him back from exploring other career options. "Bored?" Mac looked genuinely puzzled. "How can you be bored when there's so much to figure out? Every day there's a new problem to solve, a new pattern to find, a new system to understand. Yesterday I discovered that my neighbor's been stealing my newspaper for 3 months. And I got to create a whole surveillance system using my security camera and a spreadsheet to track delivery times." "You find that exciting?" asked Fang the Dental Nightmare, who was beginning to suspect that his 47 different types of teeth might be excessive. "I find it satisfying," Mac corrected. "There's a difference. Excitement is temporary. Satisfaction lasts." And that was when the assassins realized that Marcus Henderson wasn't just accidentally dangerous to the galactic economy. He was accidentally dangerous to the entire concept of being dissatisfied with your life. The moment of truth arrived when Vex produced Mac's wanted poster, a holographic display that showed his face alongside a bounty that could have purchased several small planets. Mac studied his own image with the kind of objective interest he usually reserved for particularly challenging tax returns. "I have to admit," Mac said, tilting his head slightly, "this is the best photo of me that's been taken in years. Usually I blink or look like I'm having some kind of medical emergency." "You're not terrified?" asked Whisper the Silent Death, who had given up on his vow of silence entirely and was now speaking in the kind of hushed tones usually reserved for library conversations. "Should I be?" Mac asked genuinely. "I mean, you're all here to kill me, but you've been sitting in my living room for 3 hours eating donuts and having what I can only describe as a group therapy session. If this is how assassination works, I'm starting to think the galaxy's criminal element needs better management training." This observation prompted what could only be described as a cosmic moment of clarity. 12 of the universe's most feared killers suddenly realized that they were essentially middle management in a corrupt bureaucracy, and their target was offering them career counseling. "You know what the real problem is?" Mac continued, pulling out a whiteboard that he'd been using to track Gerald's feeding schedule. "You're all working for an organization that's fundamentally dishonest. No wonder you're not happy with your jobs." He began drawing a diagram that looked suspiciously like an organizational chart. "The Galactic Revenue Service hires you to eliminate people who threaten their corruption. But corruption is inefficient. You're not protecting the galaxy, you're protecting a broken system." "But we're assassins," protested Kronk the Bone Crusher, though he said it with the kind of uncertainty that suggested he was no longer entirely sure what that meant. "So," Mac replied, adding arrows to his diagram, "that's just a skill set. The question is, what do you want to use those skills for?" I've always wanted to be a landscaper, admitted Vex quietly, which prompted a moment of stunned silence from his colleagues. Landscaping is just organized terraforming, Max said encouragingly. You already have the technical skills. You just need to redirect them toward creation instead of destruction. I like working with my hands, Kronk added hesitantly. Maybe something with animals? Pet grooming requires strength, gentleness, and attention to detail. Mac nodded approvingly. You'd be perfect for it. What followed was the most therapeutic conversation in the history of intergalactic relations. One by one, the assassins began revealing their actual interests and dreams. Whisper wanted to teach mime. Nova was interested in fireworks display rather than planetary destruction. Fang had always been curious about dentistry. This is ridiculous, Zara protested, though she was crying slightly. We're supposed to be killing you, not discussing our career aspirations. Why? Mac asked simply. What's the point of killing someone who's not actually your enemy? I didn't set out to destroy the Galactic Revenue Service. I just did my job. If doing your job correctly is a crime, then maybe the system is the problem, not the people working within it. It was at this moment that the front door exploded. Marcus Henderson, announced a voice that sounded like it had been processed through a computer made of pure bureaucracy. You are under arrest for economic terrorism, systematic disruption of galactic commerce, and aggravated accounting. The Galactic Revenue Service had arrived, and they were not interested in coffee or donuts. Well, Max said calmly, brushing debris off his sweater, I guess we'll have to continue this conversation later. The 12 assassins looked at Mac, then at the GRS agents who were filing through the smoking remains of his front door, then at each other. For the first time in their careers, they found themselves facing a moral choice that wasn't complicated by competing loyalties or conflicting contracts. You know what? Said Vex, standing up and cracking his knuckles in a way that suggested his landscaping dreams would have to wait. I think we're about to find out what it feels like to be the good guys. Finally, added Kronk, a job that makes sense. The GRS agents paused, suddenly realizing that they might have miscalculated the tactical situation. What followed was the most accountant-friendly battle in the history of galactic warfare. Mac, who had never been in a fight in his life, discovered that 43 years of dealing with bureaucratic incompetence had prepared him for exactly this moment. Excuse me, Mac said politely to the lead GRS agent, a bureaucrat so generic that he appeared to have been assembled from spare parts found in a government office supply catalog. Do you have a warrant for my arrest? We don't need warrants, the agent replied smugly. We're the Galactic Revenue Service. Actually, Max said, pulling out a binder that he'd apparently been keeping handy for exactly this situation. According to Galactic Code Section 47B, subsection 12, all law enforcement actions require proper documentation, regardless of the agency involved. The agent's confidence faltered slightly. That's not. It's right here, Mac continued, flipping through pages with the kind of methodical precision that had made him accidentally destroy a galactic government. I took the liberty of downloading the complete legal code when I was researching the original audit. You'll find that your organization has been operating outside legal parameters for approximately 3,000 years. While Mac was conducting his impromptu legal seminar, the 12 assassins were discovering that their skills translated remarkably well to home defense. Vex vaporized the agents' weapons with surgical precision. Kronk used his bone-crushing abilities to systematically destroy their communication equipment. Whisper moved through their ranks with silent efficiency, tying shoelaces together and generally creating chaos through the power of mime. This is highly irregular, protested the lead agent, who was now hopping on one foot while trying to untangle his boots. What's irregular? Mac replied, highlighting relevant passages in his legal code binder. It is an organization that steals money from 17 star systems and then tries to murder the accountant who caught them. Nova, who had been practicing her controlled demolition skills on the agent's transport vehicles, called out from the driveway. These ships are held together with bureaucratic tape and wishful thinking. No wonder the government is corrupt. They can't even maintain their own equipment. That's what happens when you prioritize corruption over competence, Mac observed, dodging a half-hearted energy blast from an agent who was clearly having second thoughts about his career choices. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted approximately 17 minutes. The GRS agents, faced with an accountant who knew their own legal code better than they did, and 12 former assassins who had redirected their homicidal tendencies toward creative problem-solving, surrendered with the kind of resigned dignity usually reserved for people who had just realized they'd been working for the wrong side of history. "So what happens now?" asked Zara, who had been using her mind-reading abilities to help the agents work through their own career dissatisfaction. "Now," Mac said, surveying the wreckage of his front door with the same calm acceptance he'd shown when his microwave had broken 3 months earlier, "we start over." 6 months later, Henderson's intergalactic accounting and life coaching had become the most successful business in the galaxy. Mac's unique combination of mathematical precision and genuine concern for people's well-being had attracted clients from across 17 star systems, all of whom were desperate for someone who could help them make sense of their finances and their lives. Vex had indeed become a landscaper specializing in therapeutic gardens for reformed criminals. Kronk's pet grooming business was booming, particularly among species with multiple appendages and complicated fur patterns. Whisper's Mime Academy had a waiting list that stretched across 3 sectors. The other 9 assassins had found their own paths. Nova was now the galaxy's premier fireworks choreographer. Fang had opened a dental practice that specialized in species with unusual tooth configurations. Blade had discovered that his intimidating presence made him an excellent mediator for contract disputes. Mac himself remained blissfully unaware of how extraordinary his ordinariness had become. He continued to live in suburban Ohio, though he'd had to expand his house to accommodate the steady stream of intergalactic visitors who came seeking his unique blend of practical wisdom and basic human decency. "Another day, another dollar," Mac said to Gerald, who was now living in a much larger aquarium that had been designed by a grateful client from the Aquatic Collective. "Though I suppose it's more like another day, another 1,000 galactic credits." Gerald, who had indeed been having an existential crisis but was now working through it with the help of a therapist that Zara had recommended, swam in what could only be described as a philosophically satisfied circle. The universe, it turned out, had needed exactly what Mac had always been, someone who cared enough to do the boring stuff right, and who treated everyone with the kind of basic respect that had somehow become revolutionary. And if that wasn't the most human thing of all, Mac couldn't imagine what was.